Oh man, he says, I know I could sell 1,000 of those. And I said, oh, have you heard that? And he says, no, but what a great name for a Christian metal group.
So, Bill, can you give a proper introduction and introduce yourself?
Well, I became a Christian in 1980. And 1984, I got to the point where I just felt like I had to start a Christian rock band. And, there wasn't a lot going back then. I was rocking before there was Stryper. There wasn't much else either. And, right when they came out in 84, that might have been a little bit of inspiration to try to get a Christian rock band going. And so I had a first band called Redeemer, and we were together until about 1989. I'd known Keith Miles for a year or two. He was the singer for a group called Holy Right. This is in the Southern California area. And me and him started the group Final Acts, and we did that until about 1991. He kind of kept going with it for a while after that, and I started another group called Rev Seven, another group with me on vocals. And did that for a couple of years, and then I moved to Nevada, moved to Las Vegas in 1993, which isn't far away from where we lived in California. It was about a 3-hour drive. We ended up starting another group together, me and Keith Miles. We started the group Titanic in late 1995. And it was a long-distance affair, and it was just hard to keep things going, hard to keep the band tight. Just a lot of little logistic problems like that. We ended up not going too much further with that. About 2000, I think it was, I get this phone call out of nowhere from a guy named Matt Hunt, whom I've never heard of at the time. And he wanted to re-release the Titanic Maiden Voyage album. His label was called Magdalene Records back then, and he was taking old out-of-print Christian albums and redistributing them. And so I said, sure, and he sent us a check, and he threw the album out, and we began a relationship at that point. He started calling me back, well, do you got anything else? You got any unreleased material? And so we spiffed up some stuff we had that became Titanic Screaming in Silence, some stuff that could have been a second Titanic album, was never finished. So we finished it, put it out, and he said, hey, what, you going to do another solo album one of these days, another album with you singing? I said, yeah, I've been wanting to, and I had some material thrown together, and I wanted to use a different name because Rev 7, it just seemed like every year or two somebody would email me and tell me, hey, guess what? There's a band in Florida called Rev 7, and it just...
It was never a good feeling, eh?
Yeah, it just, apparently it was an easy group to think of. I think I'm the first one that thought of it, but a bunch of people started thinking of it all over the world. And I thought, I'm going to get something where I can get the .com. And then I don't care if anybody else has it. I'll have the so-and-so.com. And me and Matt batted around ideas for a group name for that for like 2 years. And finally we ended up with the Seventh Power. And I remember the day I had the phone conversation with him about that. And he says, how about just the Seventh Power? I had a longer version of that, and it was too long. He says, how about the Seventh Power? And I said, wait a minute. And I checked the domain, and I said, yeah, the domain's available. I said, I'm going to buy it right now if that's the deal. If you're committing to it, I'm committing to it. I'm going to click and buy it right now. And he says, yeah, go ahead. We'll go with that. And so the Seventh Power was born. Like I needed another band name. And, but I knew it was like the third one with me singing, but the idea is, okay, I'm sticking with it this time. And I got to the seventhpower.com, and that's that. And, about a year or two ago, I was doing a bunch of recordings, some re-recordings of some, Titanic and Final Acts albums that don't have real drums on them. And, with Robert Sweet, and he says, hey, while you're at it, why don't you make an instrumental album? I said, well, okay, I had some material that I was going to use for another project for somebody, and I just ended up using that and kind of modifying the music. We had to call it something, and I said, what are you going to call it? And he just wanted to call it Bill Menchen, and he talked around with some people, and then they decided, no, let's call it Menchen. So there was yet another group born. It was going to be an instrumental album, and we ended up getting a singer on it. And so it's just another band now.
Yeah, well, is that going full time?
No, none of my stuff is really going full time. I'll do an album for this and an album for that. And I've had a couple of shows in this decade, but not really a lot. I don't have a full-time band. It's hard to find musicians, and Robert Sweet will play with me, but we still can't round out a lineup. You'd think there'd be a lot happening here in Vegas, but there's it's just a lot of tribute bands and.
Well, everything's geared to the whole tourism industry, isn't it?
Well, yeah. This isn't like a rock and roll town. Yeah, you're right there.
Yeah,
it's not. And I played something that's mostly a classic type of a styled metal. I don't like to call it classic metal because I think I bring a kind of a fresh approach to it. I have fresh inspiration. I don't use old recycled licks, but it's still I can't. It's hard to find the right musicians for that. I'd probably have to find people that have been around for a while. And there's talk. I mean, last year, me and Robert were talking about maybe we can get some little tour going or something. We came close to throwing something together, and we didn't. And there's more. I knew a few more people in this town now. Whether we have enough to really get some sort of a proper lineup, I just don't want to throw something together hashed. But and of course it has to be God's will, and we're seeking that as well. And something will probably happen, I think, somewhere along the line, and it's just something I can't force, or it'll come out cheesy. And
exactly.
But I do want to play, and I don't get much chances to play, and I really miss it. And so hopefully that's going to happen at some point down the road. I just don't know when. Well,
you've talked a lot about Robert Sweet. How did that whole relationship develop? Like, have you known him for a really long time, or?
Keith Miles, in way back, I don't know how far this is. His wife used to know Janice Sweet, Robert and Mike's mom. And she would call up, this is like, back probably in the late 80s. I don't know how she originally got to know her. And at some point she would call him up every once in a while, every time they were doing a band or a festival and asking for advice on certain things. And they had the same phone number for a long time. And when we were in Titanic, she called her up again to say, hey, I got some questions for you about things. We're in a band. Here's the situation. What do you think? Just some advice from somebody that's been around a lot and known a lot of things. And so they had dinner, and Robert just happened to be living with his mom at the time. And so he just tagged along, it's like a Tuesday or Wednesday night or whatever, nothing better to do. And Keith and Robert got to know each other. And of course we were in the same band, and Robert wasn't doing anything. And hey man, we're playing a concert here in a couple of weeks. Why don't you come out and just hang out and bum around with us if nothing else? And, and one thing leads to another, and like crack addicts or something. I mean, we're all musicians. Robert's hanging around, and at some point he's going to end up picking up a pair of drumsticks, and, about I don't know, boy, maybe it's already been about 8 or 9 or 10 years. Robert's been living here in Las Vegas that long. So me and him have been here for a while, living in the same town. And when I got my home studio to the point where I could really do drums decently at home, Matt Hunt started saying, hey, let's try to hire a drummer for these things. And of course, when he found out I was hanging around Robert Sweet, and he says, well, let's see what kind of money we can give him and have him do our work. And he's been almost the only drummer I've used for the last several albums. And of course it's been great because, he's got all this musician's frustration that he doesn't get to use with Stryper, because that's kind of a straight down the pipe kind of a thing. And
yeah,
Matt Hunt told him right from the beginning, you can do whatever you want on this music. And I said the same thing. So we've gotten a lot of killer licks out of him that people wouldn't hear any other place, really.
Yeah, even listening to, for example, the second Final Acts album that he drummed on. I mean, there's just, you hear stuff out of Robert Sweet and you go, wow, I didn't know he could drum like that.
Yeah, he kind of sounds like Tommy Aldridge or something on that album, I mean, he's just this big metal monster that would shock a lot of people if they didn't know it. And it's funny you bring up that album, Acts of the Apostles, because that was the first one that we did together. And we got about 3 or 4 songs into those recordings, and it was really kind of blowing me away. I didn't know he was going to go, he wasn't getting paid a lot of money. And I thought, he's never a guy that does things half-hearted, but I thought, well, he's going to come in and bang out some really cool beats and give me a few chops and leave. And about 4 songs into it, I said, hey, let's go out and get some lunch or something, So we're across the street at a restaurant, and I said, man, Robert, I didn't know you were going to put on a drum clinic here today. And he just looked at me and he was like, oh, do you think I'm doing a lot of stuff? And I said, man, are you kidding? Nobody's ever heard this. It's going to be great. I said, you don't owe us all of this, but you can do whatever. He says, well, I'll probably play about half of them straight ahead and about half of them progressive. And that's the finished product that you see there. And when that album came out, I mean, I got a ton of email right off the bat from people all over the place saying, wow, I've never heard Robert play like this before. And I don't get too many of those emails anymore because a lot of those people have bought all the rest of it and they're used to it.
Yeah. Let's go back to the beginning in your career. Let's start with your first band, Redeemer, who you just released a couple of re-releases with on Retroactive Records. So can you tell us a little bit about Redeemer?
Yeah, from 84 to 89. Several different lineups, but and it was a big learning process. First about being a Christian musician and just trying to learn a lot about music in general. And recording, I became friends with a guy and ran a recording studio near my house, and I really cut my teeth on recording. He was actually a pretty sharp engineer, so that was a good time, really.
Okay, so one of the things I always want to ask is with the two albums you re-released on Retroactive, Double-Edged Sword and what's the other one?
Anno Domini.
Yeah, that's it. Was that did you obviously you touched up at least some of that. How much did you end up fixing up in the studio?
The whole thing was re-recorded from the ground up.
Oh, really?
That's kind of a secret, but it's been out for a while now. And
yeah,
those old tracks were done on an odd machine, Fostex B16, which is a half-inch, 16-track, 30 inches per second. You can find those machines here and there, but I just thought, most of those machines you buy, there's problems with them. And I thought, why should I dump a ton of money into this stuff? I'll just re-record it from the ground up, and I can be done with it in a couple of days. And I'll do it right anyways. And I really tried to stick pretty close to how it was. And some of those songs I had a hard time recalling because I was going off of some, old garage practice tapes and live bootlegs and just a few bad cassettes that I had here and there. And I still came up about 4 or 5 songs short for the second album. And I was able to make contact with an old friend who was a bass player in that group. And this guy is like an archivist, man. He keeps every bad garage tape he ever had from anybody. And,
oh, wow.
And he was able to turn some stuff into MP3s and send it to me, and I would go, oh, that's how that song went. And then I'd be able to put it back together. Mm-hmm. And so some of those songs were never recorded. Probably 5 or 6 of them were never professionally recorded. So it was like the first time they ever saw a good recording. And, so I just threw it all together and, just so that people, not trying to recreate, to make the past something it wasn't, just trying to make the music available so people could see where I came from and, where I started from and where I ended up.
That, the whole Redeemer project, that sounds a lot more like, I guess, classic metal meets like maybe some REO Speedwagon or something thrown in.
There's probably a certain amount of hard rock mixed with a certain amount of metal. When I was really trying to figure out, just trying to find my niche in music in general, and there was some stuff that maybe was almost Van Halen-ish, but then there was other stuff that it was almost Blizzard of Oz. It just kind of weaved around in between various different styles, and so there's, when you listen to those 2 albums, it's not necessarily a totally coherent flow as far as style is concerned. I was just learning how to write songs, and I was trying to figure out what the best kind of songs were for me to write. So you get kind of a variety of everything. It's kind of a potpourri as songwriting goes on those records.
Now, did you play everything on these except?
I did everything on those.
You don't have Robert doing drums on these, eh?
No, I did not. And actually the drums on there is a hybrid between human stuff and machine stuff. The sound you're hearing is actually half human and half machine. I'm not going to tell you which half is which, but and I did that I was just kind of throwing them together. And there's another thing where Matt Hunt really kind of blindsided me in a good way. I just wanted to get the songs down just so I could have my legacy and just to remember where I'd been and everything. So I put all the songs together, and I didn't know if they would ever come out or anything. And I was just really just putting them together on tape just so they would, I say tape, or we're working in computers now, I'll probably say tape for the rest of my life. But I was just putting them down so I'd have them, not really sure if I figured, at some point, somehow, somewhere I'd make them available, whether I just put them on MySpace or something for people to listen to. And one day Matt comes to me on the phone and says, hey, I'm going to put up both of those Redeemer albums. Just, let's go ahead and put them out. And I wasn't really ready. And I just said, well, okay, I'm just going to give them to you how I have them. And that's that's the way you hear him on those, those albums. And he didn't make very many of those albums, and he admits he should have made more. He didn't think they'd sell that quickly, being yet another Bill Menchen project, but in an unknown one from 20 something years ago. But I think he only did like 250 of each album, and they disappeared just within a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
And I've had people email and asking me for them ever since, but they're on iTunes. You can get them out there. I think there's a few other places where you can download them. I've had a couple of people actually email me and say, I absolutely do not want MP3s. Is there any way I can get a copy of those from you? And I said, yeah, I'll send you a CDR, just send me like $10 or something. And people were, okay, yeah, I want that instead. So
yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, I don't feel right paying for an MP3 because if you want the quality. And the booklet and everything else.
Right. Oh, yeah. It's nice to have the album. I even miss 12-inch records because the covers look so much better. I just remember when I was a kid, just sitting around looking at album covers while you listen to it, and it's not as much fun to look at a CD booklet, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And, it'd be nice if there was almost like a tour book that you would buy from a band's merch table at a live show, those nice big fold out things with the giant size color pictures. It'd almost be nice if we made stuff available like that, just so people could really have something to look at with some posters and stuff. But
well, vinyl is making a big comeback now, eh?
Yeah, a lot of people are putting it out kind of as maybe as a nostalgia thing, or I don't know, just a neat little extra or something. But I have noticed that a lot of bands are making a record also. Actually, and I did have a record out a couple of years ago. Steel Legacy, a Greek label, put out Final Acts. The Beyond Hell's Gate on record.
I think that's really cool, though, for someone to get it in a new medium.
I got a kick out of seeing that, and the guy sent me a couple of copies for myself, and I think we have a record player around the house here, and I actually put it on one day and listened to it just to say I was listening to it on the record. I always use the expression records, and they still call them record companies, even though nobody's making very many records. We still call them record companies, and I still say, yeah, I'm making a new record, and by golly, I actually have a record sitting right here on the shelf. So it was kind of cool after all those years. It was kind of the cherry on top, or the icing on the cake, so to speak, to actually have a record now.
Yeah, it's like making a movie and getting it on DVD, but then when you actually see the film print, it's like, oh,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So we got Redeemer out of the way. Let's jump down to Final Acts. Now, one thing that's confused me for as long as I'm listening to your stuff is, what is the deal with Keith Miles, Simon Tyler? In Final Acts, he's Keith Miles, and then in Titanic, he's Simon. What's the scoop?
I guess he was just trying to be cool and tricky and have a stage name. But also, there was a point when we started Titanic where we were going to take almost like a Marilyn Manson sort of thing, where you take two different names from two different places to make your first and last name. Mm-hmm. And I forgot. The captain of the Titanic, one of his names was Tyler, or somebody on that crew was. And we were gonna all do that at one point, and then Ray thought, no, that's kind of creepy, man. That's a bunch of dead people that died on the ship, and I don't want to do that. So then we all kind of abandoned it. But Keith kept Simon Tyler. It was somebody named Simon and somebody named Tyler or something like that. Mm-hmm. So he went ahead and kept it and thought it was cool to have like he was going to be the captain of our ship or something. And
so his name is Keith Miles then?
Yes, that's the same guy.
Okay, thank God, yeah.
Nobody's ever seen Simon Tyler and Keith Miles together in the same place at the same time. So we're assuming it is the same guy.
Yeah, it's just funny. I've sent him a couple of emails, and every time I address him as something different, and I just go, I hope you know who the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So you started that in, it was about 89 or so. How'd that all begin?
It's kind of a funny story. Some of the stuff that I've got on some of the websites is really the true story of how that started. Keith used to throw these, he started out in answer to the Secular Us Festival in the early 80s. I don't know if you ever heard of those. Yeah, I think there was two of them, or maybe there was just one, the Us Festival. I think it was headlined by Van Halen in probably 82 or something like that. And
yeah.
Years later, he says, well, let's do a Christian version. Let's do a His Festival. And So he started his festival in late spring, early summer, and then he said, let's do another one for Halloween. And he had one called the Metal Midnight. I probably did the second festival with Redeemer. So it was one of those things, we had each other's phone number on file, but we really didn't hang out or know each other well. We both lived in the Inland Empire, which for people that aren't familiar with Southern California, it's about an hour east of Los Angeles and about 45 minutes north of Orange County. It's San Bernardino Riverside area. We both lived in the Inland Empire. There was two groups of people in the metal scene. There was people from quote unquote LA, which we considered everything from Orange County all the way up to LA and Hollywood and everything. That was LA. And then San Bernardino Riverside was quote the Inland Empire.
Oh, okay.
And so we were Inland Empire guys. And at some point, Holy Right, he kind of split with the group. The other four guys went another way, and he was kind of sitting around with nothing to do. And I noticed at one of his festivals, he had already had a group name. He had a concept. He wanted to have a group called Final Acts. And at one of his festivals, I think it was one that I didn't go to because I didn't have a group. He had a t-shirt table, and he was selling t-shirts for Final Acts. He didn't have a group. I mean, he didn't even have one person to play with. It was all by himself.
Oh man.
And and he's not a musician. He doesn't play the guitar or anything. So he had no music or nothing. And he's just like, I'm going to do this. And he had t-shirts made and people bought them. And it was just, the funny thing is people thought, man, that is a great name for Final Acts. I can't wait till you get a band together. And they were buying his t-shirts. And when Matt Hunt found out I was in Final Acts, he said, you were in Final Acts with Keith? And I said, yeah. And he says, oh man, he says, I know I could sell 1,000 of those. And I said, oh, have you heard that? And he says, no, but what a great name for a Christian metal group. And that just shows that that's why Keith was able to sell t-shirts with no band, because it's true. It's a great name for a Christian metal group. And it was a great concept. I mean, Matt was confirming it, 15, 20 years later by saying, wow, I want that, so that's how Final Acts ended up on Retroactive. But one day I'd kind of run as far as I could with Redeemer, and we didn't have a drummer for a while. And me and the bass player, Paul Brecht, the last bass player of the group, we'd actually done a couple of concerts. We were doing concerts with a drum machine.
Oh man.
And we just couldn't find a good drummer, and I wasn't going to compromise and have a bad drummer. And we sounded great. It was just, we're just going along going, it'd be nice to have a band one of these days. And for some reason, just out of desperation, just like, man, who can I make a band with? I'm trying to think of any, I can play guitar or I can sing or I can do both. And I'm just trying to think of, I thought, that Keith Miles guy, he's always happening. He's one of those people that just stuff's always happening around him. Mm-hmm. And I thought, and I'm just always been the shy guy. I don't promote myself well. I'm not good at meeting people. Maybe if I hook up with somebody who hooks up with people, we'll attract musicians and stuff. And I called him up out of nowhere, and somebody else answered the phone at his house and says, oh yeah, he's out in the, him and his dad used to fix up, I don't know if it was MG midgets or something, cars. And they said, well, he's out in the garage working on a car. And they went out and yelled under the car, hey Keith, there's a guy named Bill Menchen on the phone. He says, okay, tell him I'll call him back. And so the person came back and says, oh yeah, he's working on a car right now. He'll call you back. And I thought, okay, great. He probably doesn't want to talk to me. And the funny part of the story, this is a true story. They're in the garage, a couple of people hanging out. And this is like something from a bad sitcom. An hour later, he rolls out from under the car and says, what did you say? I said, Bill Menchen called. Well, why didn't you tell me he called? I did tell you he called. Oh man. And he went into the house and called me up and said, what did you want? And I said, yeah, I just wanted to see if you wanted to try to make a band together. Maybe we could try to do something. And he says, oh yeah, I don't have anything going. I'd like to check it out. So I threw a song together. I called him like the next day and I said, okay, I have a song. I had a 4-track tape deck in the garage, and I used a drum machine and 4-track tape deck and threw some bass on it. He came over and grabbed it and immediately wrote a song, words to it, called Prodigal Son. And he came over and tried it out for me, and he just sang along with a cassette tape and said, man, it sounds great. A couple of days later, he came back and he goes, no, wait a minute. It's different. I changed the lyrics to it. It's called Baptized in Blood now. And so that's the opening track from Beyond Hell's Gate, and that's how we got that band started.
Yeah, that's funny. That's whenever I show people that band, that's always the track I use, is Baptized in Blood. So,
it's a high energy. typical 80s metal high energy song, and it's a good song, you know. And I tell you what, it's already been about 2 years. Matt Hunt had Robert Sweet to track some drums to that album, and it's going to come out with his drumming on it here in a couple of months. And he just blows the roof off of it with the drums. You know, I heard some people online I was running across some blog sites once, and somebody said, "Yeah, I heard Robert's playing drums on those for them to be re-released, but I don't know. Can the drums really make that much difference?" And I just kind of snickered to myself. I just thought to myself, "Yeah, just you wait. You know, you're going to find out, man." I mean, he just blows them apart.
Oh yeah,
it's really killer. He did to that album what he did to Acts of the Apostles. Acts of the Apostles would have been half as good without that drumming.
This is true.
And most people when they hear it, the unfortunate part for them is they're going to have to shell out the money and buy it again.
Yeah, I know.
It's just that much better, you know.
So with this re-release, you're not handling any of the business or promotion or anything like that for it, eh?
If you want something to flop and go into the cellar, just turn it over to me and I'll kill it. Which is a bad quality to have if you're a musician trying to get your stuff out.
Yeah, this is true.
If I had to put out flyers for my own records or take out full page ads and say, "Oh, here's my music. Hope you like it. If you don't, that's fine too."
Well, I mean, that's sort of, unless you're really John Bon Jovi. I mean, that's most musicians. You know, here's my stuff. Enjoy. Do with it what you will. But
yeah, I think I think most musicians should be humble, and I think a lot of them are. I don't know, maybe a lot of them aren't. Famous ones aren't because they get worshipped, and you know, what can you expect? But
yeah, it actually really shocked me. I just did an interview the other day with Tony Mills. I don't know if you know him.
No.
Oh, he's in TNT now. He was in Shy and
right.
A bunch of other bands. But anyways, he's been around the block. I mean, for somewhat underground musician, I mean, the guy's just done everything. It's like, who the hell haven't you worked with? Anyways, he shocked me because I'm thinking, you know, oh, this guy's going to be, you know, big rock star and just the most humble guy you could ever meet.
Yeah, some people you know, Robert Sweet's a really down to earth guy, and I also came across Tony Franklin in my travels, the bass player from, you know, The Firm and Whitesnake. I mean, he's been around the world and done a lot of stuff. I mean, and that guy is one of the quietest, mildest, humblest people I've ever met ever.
Wow.
And you know, a lot of great musicians are actually quite humble. I've heard I met Randy Rhoads' brother this year earlier. He was recording in my studio, and he sat down and gave us some Randy stories because we demanded it.
You're telling me.
You know,
you got a good one for us?
Oh man, you know,
a good 40 maybe.
You know, I probably a lot of the typical ones, but I was able to share some stories with Kelly Rhoads that really kind of shocked him. That just things that he just hadn't heard that perspective from other musicians. But you know, I mean, Randy Rhoads was an incredibly shy and quiet and mild guy, incredibly humble. He just, when he was voted, I think, third best guitar player in Circus Magazine, it shocked him because he didn't know that people were paying attention, even though he was playing with Ozzy Osbourne. He just didn't think he was that big of a deal. You know, he was still taking guitar lessons when he died.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah,
you know,
he's getting classical training or
right,
whatever.
Right. But, you know, the guy was, you know, he was incredibly humble. There's been a lot of them. Even at one point back in the early days, Edward Van Halen said he, quote, did not consider himself to be an outrageous talent, you know, and
yeah,
he only inspired like 50 million guitar players, but didn't consider himself to be outrageously talented, you know. So I think anybody who's one of the true measures of greatness, Tommy Aldridge is another guy who's incredibly humble. I just find that with a lot of great musicians, they're really humble, and it's really refreshing to see that in somebody who's great. Mm-hmm. That they're gracious at the same time.
Yeah, not somebody who goes out with a huge. I mean, because it's the old thing too. I mean, there's always 20 people better than you.
Sure.
I mean, even Neil Peart or Mike Portnoy, they go out there every night and go, you know, there's other drummers that just do this so much better than I can.
Yeah.
And we're back. That was Menchen from 2008 off their self-titled album. And Bill, what can you tell us about working with Tony Franklin on that project?
Well, this was a bizarre one. About 4 years ago, Ray Kilsdonk, the bass player from His Witness and Titanic. And he was also the first bass player in Rev 7, somebody I've known for quite a long time. He called me up one day, and him and Robert are driving around town. They're very close friends. They're driving around town. I can tell they're driving in the car. They're on a cell phone. And he says, hey, man, he says, I met this Rod Stewart impersonator, and this guy is unbelievable. He's from England. He's immigrating over here, and he's trying to get a backup band together. And me and Robert are going to do it. He's going to try to get like a major strip show landed with this thing. He said, hey, do you want to do the guitar? And I'm just like, oh, man, it's just a bunch of kind of licks I don't know. And I was him-hawing around, and he says, oh, come on, you can pull it off. And I said, man, it's just all those Stones kind of guitar licks, man. And I just never got into any of that guitar playing. And I said, I like Rod Stewart music, although it's not hard rock, all of it, but I like a lot of the music. He's got some great tunes. And I could hear Robert in the background. He says, who is that, Bill? And he says, yeah. Oh, come on, he can do it. Tell him to do it. And I said, all right, I'll do it. And on one sense, what a mistake that was. I shouldn't have went along with that because, man, I got myself into so much work. I worked my tail off because I don't just slap music together. Even if I'm doing covers, I sit down and I meticulously get it right.
Yeah.
And I had to learn some of those guitar solos just note for note, and I was getting blisters on my fingers. But the cool part of it is the singer ended up being a great guy, and we had a blast getting to know the guy, and we had a lot of fun in that band.
What's the singer's name?
His name is Martin Andrew, and
I've heard that somewhere.
You've probably heard him. The stage name that I gave him, David St. Andrew. He's on the Titanic album.
Well, I never knew that. I know that now.
Yes,
but,
yeah, he's known. If you go to, I think he's still got his website up, martinandrew.com. And he's busy right now, like 7 days a week performing, as his career is finally taking off here a little bit. We were never able to get the show signed because for about a year, we couldn't get anybody in this town until about a year. It took us, he had talked to literally every guy in charge of every showroom in this town before somebody would bother telling him, well, unless you've got at least $250,000 minimum startup money to floor wall this thing, nobody's going to take you anywhere. And we said, well, thanks. We need to go find an investor now. And we were never able to really come up with quite that much money. So, and we had a phenomenal show. It was so frustrating. It would have been easier. People would have said your show stinks. But the problem is, we had this killer lineup of musicians, and we had a couple of different lineups, and Robert and Ray were part of one lineup, and we had a different lineup that they weren't in. And everybody would look at our videos and go, man, you guys are awesome. This is the best Rod Stewart show we've ever seen anywhere. And we just couldn't get it. We couldn't get it financed, and nobody wanted it. And there were casinos, some smaller casinos that had empty showrooms, and they wouldn't let us use their showrooms. You know, even for a cut of the take or anything, they're just like, nope. And we found out later they want them empty because when people walk into a showroom, they're not losing money at the tables. And that's the problem. They don't want you to have a show in there for $50 a seat. You know, if Celine Dion comes in there and the tickets are $300 a seat, they don't mind the casino emptying out because they're going to make $50,000 or more. I mean, more than that. I mean, they're going to make hundreds of thousands. If they can make $100,000, for Cher or somebody like that being in a huge showroom, then they don't mind the tables getting empty for an hour. Mm-hmm. But they don't want the tables emptying out for people like us. So we weren't able to get it signed. And during that period of time, though, we needed another guitar player because, man, there's a lot of keyboard parts. We weren't going to be able to do it with a 4-piece lineup. The old guitar player from His Witness, Ronnie Pena, which used to be Ray's brother-in-law, and he lived in California, and he worked at the Fender factory, the Fender Musical Instrument Factory in Corona, California. Cool. Well, Tony Franklin works at the Fender Musical Factory. Tony Franklin is the SWR rep, and he also has a couple of signature basses on Fender. And so that's why we went there and met him to jam with him one time, because after Ray was out of the group, Ray left the group to do some other stuff. And we were looking for another bass player, and Ronnie says, hey, man, we could get Tony Franklin, and he's bad, I mean. let me talk to him and see if he's into it. And Tony's like, man, that would be kind of fun, you know? So I probably can't do it 5 days a week, but if you can get another bass player, man, I can do like the weekend shows. And we said, sure, you know, let's go jam with the guy. And so we went to the Fender factory and we went to a private rehearsal room with big leather couches and food and nice instruments and sound gear and just hung out for an afternoon for a couple hours. We played about 8 or 10 songs together, man, and it was smoking. Rod Stewart could have stepped into this band and used it as a good backup band. I mean, it was a hot lineup. You know, it just never panned out. We almost did a show with Tony. We had a couple of weekends we were going to do at a place out of town, at a small casino in another town here in Nevada, Mesquite, Nevada. We almost did it and it backed out at the last minute, but we never played with the guy. But about a year later, you know, after we had disbanded the project and Martin Andrew went on back to what he was doing, you know, playing with tracks and doing gigs here and there. And he's also an actor and he does acting gigs and stuff. And when I was doing the Menchen thing, which was going to be a solo project just with me and Robert, I was thinking, you know, I can't just play a bunch of leads to fill this album up because there's not going to be any vocals. If I had some other hot player who could really show off and play some killer licks, who do I know that's really, really great? And I'm just sitting here racking my brain one night and I said, you know, I know Tony Franklin a little. And I emailed him and he says, oh yeah, Bill, how's it going? You know, I remember you. Yeah, great to hear from you, blah, blah, blah. Hey, would you be interested in doing a track, you know? And he gave us his price and it was pretty steep. And I hit up Matt Hunt and he said, we just can't afford it, Bill. And I said, all right, well, I guess. And I kind of let the air out of my balloon and my wife talked about it. And she says, you know what, just pay him the money and have him do one song just so you can say you got Tony Franklin on the record. And when Matt came out to my house that year, which was, I guess, fall of 2007, I think, to watch Robert lay down the drums for Beyond Hell's Gate, I had that track with Tony Franklin. I said, by the way, Matt, you're going to get this one for free. I'm paying for it. It was expensive, but here it goes. I played it for him and it just blew his head right off. And he goes, oh man, ask him how much he wants to do a whole album. It's too good. We can't not have this guy on there. And Tony made us a good deal. And man, I mean, I don't have to tell you the bass is smoking on that record.
Oh yeah.
And then after all that, Matt goes, oh, we got to get a singer. It's too good of an album. We can't just have it be an instrumental album like this. We got to get a singer. I'm like, well, okay. We tried a few venues, you know, we tried a few different people and we ended up with Ken Redding, who fits the mold pretty good there, I guess. And he was available. And so that's how that album came about. Kind of strange, you know, Matt, it was his idea to put the whole thing together and his idea to name it what he named it. You would think it was all my idea because it's my name and everything, but it was just the album that I just didn't have anything to do with, and yet it has my name on it, which is kind of weird. I feel like the janitor or something, you know. I was just there.
Well, I mean, you wrote and recorded it, didn't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, but I mean, it was just... I was just kind of, it started out, I don't want to say it was half-hearted. Actually, I had written an album for a different singer a couple of years ago for a different project. Somebody asked me to put an album worth of material together, and I did, and they weren't able to get their thing financed, so I just kept the material. I wasn't, you know, wasn't going to give it away if they weren't going to do it, and I just had it sitting on my computer, and I reworked a lot of the music to fit the musicianship. Mm-hmm. And I remember that album sat in my computer for about 4 or 5 years. Since probably, I don't know, 03 or something, or 02, somewhere around there. And I just, every once in a while I'd think about it, man, that's a shame. That's such great music and I never got to use it. And it didn't fit any of my other projects. And then finally here came a different project and I thought, well, here we can use it for that. We'll establish the sound and that'll be it. And, Ken fit right in, and me and him kind of split the lyric writing. And
how'd you meet Ken?
Well, Ken was the singer for His Witness. He was in a band in the early '80s called the Omega Band. Ray Kilsdonk, when His Witness broke up in the summer of 1991, I was putting Rev 7 together, and forgot how we knew Ray. or the people from His Witness. But I know that His Witness had played at some of Keith Smiles' his festivals and Metal Midnights as well. So it was that whole Inland Empire thing again. His Witness was an Inland Empire band, and so was Holy Right and Redeemer and Rev 7 and Final Axe and Emerald and everything. So there was just, somehow we got a hold of Ray. We were looking for a bass player for the group. And when we got a hold of Ray, he was from His Witness. And about a year later, Ray had moved out of town and we had a different bass player. I know this is kind of weird because that was a band with me singing and it was kind of Aussie sounded like stuff, but Ken actually joined the band on vocals and I just moved over to guitar. And my cousin had left the group, Bruce Menchen. He was the guitar player in Rev 7. So the whole thing really was a completely different group. And we recorded an album's worth of material together. My cousin wrote some of it. And that is one of the last few things I have that's sitting in the can that's never been released, and we may put it out someday. That's how I know Ken Redding. So I ended up knowing 3 out of 4 people in His Witness. I ended up getting to know Ronnie Pena really well from the Rod Stewart project, and he was also in His Witness.
Oh, okay.
Just a bunch of recycled musicians here. We made the rounds.
That's really cool. Also, I'm looking here. You got a new Seventh Power album out, eh? Somewhat new by this point.
Dominion and Power came out in 2008, I guess. Maybe it came out right before Menchen. Yes, that's the newest one with Robert.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the problem is with the last. I'm just trying to play catch up right now with all your projects.
Me too. Yeah, you're naming them off to me, and I have to figure out what I've done. Feel like kind of I hope this doesn't offend anybody. I'm kind of a whore musically, I'm playing on any of my.
Nothing wrong with that.
I just. And I'm in the funny thing is I'm this really loyal guy. I'm really loyal and consistent to the point of a fault or maybe being boring. So for me to have this many groups, I guess the rock business is a tough business. And even if you're not in it really as a quote unquote business, even if you're just doing it for fun, first of all, I think you're dealing with artists. Artists are just, a lot of artists are flaky, but even the ones that aren't flaky are funny because think of it. We're people who think of stuff that doesn't exist, and then we bring it into existence. And, we're the guy sitting in the restaurant staring out the window thinking of drum beats and stuff and numbers. And then, I got a good idea. You get up and you walk out, you go home, and a song is born or an album is born. Or, we're visionaries, and we're wired up differently to be able to do that kind of stuff. And there's always a lot of... it's hard to keep groups going because people get their feelings hurt easily. Musicians have fairly fragile egos because, not egos, just emotions, because especially if you're a singer, you put your voice out there. If your guitar playing sounds bad, you can say, well, that guitar wasn't very good. I needed new pickups. Or if you're a drummer, you can say, well, I had worn out drums heads. If somebody doesn't like your voice, there's nothing you can do because it's part of your body. And the musicians would come and go, and things would happen in people's lives, and they'd have to leave a group. And the next thing you know, too many key members would be gone out of a group, and the group would be disbanded. And here I've ended up with all these groups over all these years, which is so unlike me.
It's the nature of the business. One thing I want to sort of backtrack. I've seen footage. There's a pro shot show of Final Axe in the early '90s on YouTube. What was this show like? How'd you get a pro shot show together?
That was something that Keith Miles run across this guy Charlie Holzknecht and his son were trying to start a production company, film company called Prism Productions. They were willing to do stuff really cheap because they needed to get their name on stuff, and we needed somebody to shoot our stuff cheap, and they needed somebody to shoot who'd put on a reasonably decent looking show with some lights and some smoke on a stage with a crowd, that they could. And they came in with, I think, 3 cameras. They had 2 big platform mounted tripod guys out in the audience. And then they had one guy roaming around the stage. He contracted those guys. I don't know. He probably didn't pay them very much, maybe hundreds of dollars or something, or $1,000 or something, to come in and shoot the whole show. And one of those, I think we had them a couple of times. And one of those times, we actually stayed after our set was over and we came back out and did like a lip sync, like an MTV styled music video with our studio tracks. So we had a better soundtrack and everything, and added in some other various shots just taken around the city later. And that's kind of how that happened. We actually hired him. So we were doing a lot of stuff at those. You know, on a shoestring budget, we didn't have the best sound and we didn't have the biggest production company shooting it, but just with like no sponsors, we were trying to pull these concerts off, and we were actually getting them done and getting them filmed too. So yeah, I mean, we had it done. We hired it out.
In that, I think was Tim involved in that? Tim Palmatier? If I'm pronouncing last name right.
Tim Palmatier was in the last version of Final Acts, and he was at Metal Midnight 4, which was the last Final Acts concert that ever happened with me in the band. And that was 1990. And we never played again after that. I think Keith kept the band going for a while, and they changed the name a couple of times before disbanding it. But that was the last time that I played with the group, and he was in that band. I don't know if Tim played shows before that one, but I know that he was. If you're seeing Tim Palmatier on the drums, that's Metal Midnight 4. Oh, the bass player in that filming, if that's the one that has Tim Palmatier with the double kick red pearl drum set.
It's actually all in black and white. What surprised me, I sent an email to the guy who had it posted because I was trying to find out more information and see if I could actually get a copy. And he said, well, yeah, I've got the whole show and I'll upload it at some point. And it was Tim. Oh,
okay. Well, then it's Tim. Okay, yeah. Then that's him. And the bass player in that concert is Bruce Menchen, my cousin. He filled in on bass. He practiced with us twice and went on stage. Our bass player just flaked out on us, and he must have had a creative moment being an artist and all, and it just disappeared like 2 weeks before the show, and it got down to about a week before the show, and his wife hadn't seen him, and we never saw the guy again. He just disappeared, and that's metal for you, I guess. And
Pretty
and
much.
I called Bruce and I said, we're in a huge jam right here, man. Can you pull this off? And he was getting together a new lineup with some guys, and he says, you know what? I'll bring over my bass player's bass and rig, and I'll throw the material. And he had seen us a bunch of times, and he basically knew the music. And he practiced with us twice. Just did the set all the way through once, each song all the way, and just walked on stage and pulled it off great. He's just one of those kind of guys that could come in and do that. He was the guy. He was the only guy that could have pulled that off like that, and he did a great job.
Have you seen any of that footage since, or do you even have it?
You know, I have very little of anything. I have seen the footage. That's the raw and edited footage, most of it.
I mean, I personally, I'm not going to pressure anything, but I think that'd be a really cool bonus if you could throw a video or two on the new Final Acts as a bonus.
You know, I'm really sensitive about letting stuff out that doesn't have really great sound quality, and I know that people don't care when it's really old like that. They just want to see it, no matter what.
The other thing too is, I mean, you got to be wary of copyright and stuff, right? Like, you'd probably have to get all licensing from the Prism company you dealt with?
No, they didn't own it like that.
So they were just hired to shoot it, and then
and they were able to. We let them use it to promote them, and they let us keep it.
Oh, cool.
And they did get paid to shoot it, so they don't own the deal.
So you did Rev 7 till 99, and then after that you did did you take a break between Seventh Power and was Seventh Power born out of Rev 7?
You know, Seventh Power is a group with me singing, and it's the continuing saga of what was Redeemer and Rev 7, me singing. You know, I've always had a bit of an Ozzy Osbourne-ish type of a tone to my voice, even when I wasn't trying to make it sound like that. Well, people always said that it did, because I grew up listening to his music, and you know, I don't have a gravel-throated scream, so you're going to sound like somebody clean. And in metal, there's not that many of those clean singers like that, and he's one of them. So in Rev 7, I kind of played it up a little bit. Like I said, when I got hooked up with Matt Hunt at Retroactive, I wanted to do another Rev 7 album, but I didn't want to keep going with that name just because I couldn't get the .com, and I really feel strongly about having a .com whenever you put a band out. And I mean, if you can at all. I mean, and people are making up all kinds of crazy names of bands these days, and they probably do that so they can get the .com. I just think if you can, it just means a lot. It's easier. If you want to know something about the Seventh Power, just go to the7thpower.com, you know.
Let's get all the plugs out of the way right now because you got a ton of websites.
Yeah, I put one. There's one on MySpace for just about everything you can think of. Well, I've got 2.coms. The one that has all of my stuff combined in one place is BillMenchen.com. There's a tab there that you can click on for every single band. There's the history behind some of them. If you go to the easiest way to do this, if you go to myspace.com/BillMenchen, just look on my top friends list, and there's all of my bands there: Redeemer, Rev 7, Final Acts, Titanic, Menchen, the Seventh Power. I've got them all right there, so you can just access them really easily. Matter of fact, all of the individual links for all of my MySpace pages are on BillMenchen.com. If you just click on links, and it has a link for everything. And I've recently put up some new, just within the last couple of months, I actually put up an official Final Acts MySpace page and an official Titanic MySpace page. Just so there's a fan site on there for both of those groups that somebody did a long time ago, but they haven't been logging in for quite a while or answering any of my messages. And since these albums are going to be re-released, I really need some current way to, make sure that they're addressing those issues. And that's why I started a couple of pages myself, not that I needed something to do, or it's a big inconvenience, and it's quick to throw a page up and toss a few songs on the music player, but then to sign up 40 trillion names and stuff, you're just sitting around, even with high-speed internet, I'm sitting here for, day after day trying to get all of my usual fans from all of my other pages on MySpace, get them all on there so they understand, hey, here's the site.
Well, I remember even in the early days of Titanic, when I picked up the reissue of Maiden Voyage, I couldn't find squat. It was very hard to find anything about the band. You go, do these guys even exist? Yeah,
I know. And, but that was the strange part of music history where the internet was becoming a household thing.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of bands out there that still weren't really on the internet. And I didn't even get my own personal computer at my house until 1998 was when I bought my first computer. So that's why it was really hard. And after a while, we kind of came around and got everything together. And that's why I've tried to maintain a presence on the internet now. And I've been doing that pretty consistently ever since then, for about the last 10 years. And of course, now, if you know who you're looking for, you just go to Google, and if you know anybody's name in the group and type it in, bam, the group will come up somewhere.
Yeah.
And I've Googled my name a couple of times over the past couple of years. There's just more and more all the time, more and more web pages, webzines, and mail order sites, and MySpace, and everything all over the place that pops up. So it's getting pretty easy to find one of the groups that I'm in now. Getting back to it, just to recapsulate something for Rev 7, we were officially a group when we put together the first Rev 7 in 1991, The Unveiling. But the rest of the 3 albums that we did there wasn't really a we there. They were project albums with Drum Machine. And there was one done in 1994 after I'd moved to Las Vegas. I did one myself, and I kind of wanted some of the original vibe, so I had Bruce play the lead on it. And but the rest of it, I did all of it myself and wrote all the music. And when I got a computer in 1998, my cousin Bruce Menchen, one of the reasons why I got a computer and was not to surf the internet was because I was talking to Bruce on the phone one day, and I said, so what have you been using to record lately? And he says, well, I'm using a computer. And I'm thinking at work, we got computers, but the screen is green and there's nothing but numbers and letters on it. There was no pictures on it. It was like old fashioned stuff. And I'm like, how do you record on a computer? Because that was my vision of what a computer was. And he says, oh man, there's music software programs. And I asked him, so how good of a computer do I have to get, and how much is it going to cost? And, for just under $1,000, I got a PC. And he goes, yeah, I got the recording software. And he says, I'll come up and just download it in your computer, man. You can start recording right away. And I'm like, no kidding, huh? I'm like, you got to be kidding. This is great. And he came up, put Cakewalk Pro Audio in my thing. And you know what? Within about 2 to 3 months, I had an album written and recorded. And that was the third Rev 7 album called 7 Years of Good Luck. And then the very next year in 1999, I did another one called 747. I I got really inspired and just started recording. And I thought, man, this is so cool. I got a studio at home.
Did any of those records see proper release, or what? What was the deal with that?
Well,
at the time,
not at the time. And I was selling hardly nothing. I had no band. There was no playing out. There was no nothing. And there used to be a guy named Christian Demo Clearinghouse, Don Studebaker, in Ontario, California, and he used to sell all of my stuff. And I don't know how many copies of those albums that I sold through him. And he eventually stopped doing it because he was trying to charge like really reasonable prices, but he was losing money at it. And he kept doing it for a while because he just loved doing it. But after a while, he's just like, well, I can only lose so much money on this. And he stopped doing it. But now the Rev 7 stuff has been re-released and remixed on Retroactive, and those are the Heavy Laden albums.
Oh, okay.
Those are compilations. That's why there's 20 songs on each one. There's first two Rev 7 albums are Heavy Laden Volume 1, and the second two are Heavy Laden Volume 2.
Was that remixed at all, or no?
The first two albums were recorded under completely different formats, and they had different sounds. And I thought, to put those songs all on one disc, I should re-record them all. And I did. And what is really crazy, when Matt sprung that, hey, I'm going to put out all your stuff. This is like 2 or 3 years ago, with no warning, all at once. And that's when I told you about how I had the Redeemer stuff all ready to go, but I didn't know it was really ready to release. But I just checked over the mixes and went, well, that's pretty close. So I just shoveled that to him. And he goes, well, I want all the Rev 7 right now. And I said, all the Rev 7? He goes, yeah, I'm just going to re-release it. And I went, okay. I said, can you give me a couple of weeks? He says, you got a couple of weeks. And I started looking at the stuff and evaluating it. And there was a lot of stuff. I had a computer crash in the early days before I had a CD burner, and I didn't have the original master tracks to the last two Rev 7 albums that I did on the computer. And I said, you know what? I'm going to re-record this thing from the ground up. And I'll have a hybrid drum sound, which is what appears on Redeemer, but it'll be quick. And I did all 20 songs in, I think, 2.5 weeks.
Oh my God.
And I'm to get the Aussie sound, I'm triple or quadruple tracking all of the lead vocals. And it's wintertime and my throat is dry. And I just plowed through those songs. I was doing 1 to 2 songs a night.
Oh.
And I mixed the whole thing and I said it to Matt, and he was like, are you kidding? He says, he calls me up and says, I got a question for you. Do you ever sleep? You're working 40 hours a week. How are you doing this? Well, I wasn't working 40 hours a week because it was Christmas and New Year's weekend of that year. So I had some time off work. There were some holidays and my wife's working and she's in the casino. So I had like all day and night some of those days. And I was just blasting through the material. And we got past New Year's and I delivered the thing and he goes, wow, it sounds great. He goes, this is when he was doing, he was going to start up a demo label for a while called Watergrave Records.
Is that still going? Because he's released a few things. No?
He has, but he stopped it. And one of the things was he blamed it on me. He said, you were supposed to send me demos and you sent me these great sounding albums. And it kind of showed a lot of things up on the label. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing was actually a complete disaster. He says it wasn't all my fault, but he was kidding. I mean, it was a compliment when he was saying it was kind of your fault because you were supposed to give me demos and you gave me good sounding albums. And I said, well, man, I couldn't let garbage come out. But after I shoveled him for volume 2, I shoveled him 3 and 4. And I said, do I have another week and a half or so, Matt? And he goes, you got a couple of more weeks. And I re-recorded The Unveiling and Hell and Back. I recorded all of those. I recorded 18 of those 20 songs and 2 of them were instrumentals. So I recorded 38 songs in about 3.5 weeks, and I did everything on them from the ground up, and that's how those became the Heavy Laden Volume 1 and Volume 2. So if they don't sound like there's a lot of frills on those records, I mean, I was just smoking through the tracks. I was not spending any time with sound effects or intricate guitar playing. I was just throwing them together as quick as I could.
God. I mean, I'm just sitting there going, we've recorded albums and it took 2 months to do like 7 or 8 songs, and here you are doing 40.
Yeah, yeah, I did
Oh
38 out of the
man.
40 within about 3 weeks or so. And so that's how those came out. I wanted everything clean, and I wanted a flowing, congruent sound. I didn't want all these odd tracks that, if people are listening to loud rock music on their stereo, I didn't want every other song to be changing and stuff. So I tried to, and this kind of thing has been done before, actually. When Black Sabbath put together a greatest hits back in the 70s, We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll. They re-recorded all those songs from the ground up.
Okay, so let's go over to how I was introduced to you now, Titanic.
Okay.
Okay, so you did Maiden Voyage. That, I mean, when you did it, that only lasted for a short while, didn't it? That was like 2 years, and then you guys split.
Well, what happened? A lot of things happened quickly. We kind of got the group together around November. Well, I think we first started actually rehearsing. I remember it was kind of warm, so it must have been like September of '95. And by November and December, we were in the studio recording it. We recorded the album, and it was just one of those typical things. We were putting it out ourselves, and we had to save up money to get CDs together, and we wanted a good covers, and we wanted nice production and everything, a good art layout. So it took us a while, and finally we had our record release party, which was our last concert together, probably somewhere around June or July of '96. And by this time, Robert Sweet was already hanging out with us. We had met him in the spring of '96. And I was already kind of tired of, it took us so long to get the album out. That's the thing about a band. Once you get inspiration, you got to get that stuff out, because
Yeah,
you can lose your momentum, and you can lose your vibe, and you can lose that vision that you first had. And
that's why so many bands break up. I think the other half is people don't realize it's a business. As soon as you put something to tape, you're no longer a bunch of artists screwing around. Now you're a business.
Yeah, even though I hate to have the business aspect of it, yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a business, and there's just so many facets to it to do it well. But one of the biggest things, I think, is inspiration and vibe, and you get that momentum going, and you got to keep it going. And we lived far apart. It was probably, and especially with the band, it was hard to keep the band tight. And my brother, my cousin Bruce Menchen came into the group for a little while just to kind of help rehearse, so they could rehearse without me down there. And I just don't think it was enough. It was too little, too late. And we broke up pretty much right after about a week or so after that concert, when our CD came out. I told the guys, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. It's just too much hassle. So we were kind of just sitting around kicking back, and Robert was living in forgot where he was living in California, but really close to Keith and Ray, and they all started hanging out together, and we said, hey, Robert's not doing anything, let's try to get a band going together. And so we kind of continued on with a little bit of the Titanic idea, but Robert wanted a new name, and we're like, okay, and we're trying to figure out a new name. We ended up playing a show live together as Titanic, and it was, I don't know if, I guess it was that year. It was '96. It was Christmas of '96. There was an old friend of ours, Keith Day. He used to have a rag back in the '80s called Gospel Metal, and he had a Christian bookstore in Orange County, and he had like 20 Christian bands play 2 or 3 songs each without like a regular PA system. They weren't mic and drums and stuff. It was actually in his bookstore. And it was on Christmas, and Sin Dizzy was there, with Tim Gaines and Oz Fox. Yeah. And I mean, there was just tons. There was anybody in the LA area, almost anybody I'd ever heard of. I mean, there was like 20 bands there, and they invited us to play, and we're just hanging out with Robert, and we said, hey, you want to do this show? And so we put together 3 Titanic songs off of Maiden Voyage, and did a few rearrangements. And of course, he did his drums the way he wanted to do. And we went down there and we played together, and we actually played one concert, 3 songs with Robert Sweet as Titanic. And
was it at this time that he, because on the Greatest Hits, the Titanic Greatest Hits album, did I think one of the songs on there said he recorded a song that was never released at that time?
He was doing some tracks off and on during 1996. He wanted to use a good studio, and the guys in the band told him, man, we should use the studio in Vegas that Bill's been using, Sun Song Studio. And it was kind of like an extension of Jack Blair and Nimbus in the 80s. It was a guy that I'd started recording with here when I moved here. Became friends with the guy, and he had a phenomenal studio. I mean, he's had a lot of people in the studio, Slaughter and everybody's recorded here.
Wow.
And so it was a great studio. I mean, you go into it and you go, oh, this is a big league studio, you know. And so Robert wanted to do some demo work, and I think some of the guys in the band were helping him pay for some of the tracks, and he was going in doing some of his demo stuff from what he was going to try to call a project, Robert Sweet's Noise. And when we had him in the studio one time, he said, hey, Robert, we just want to hear you play with some of our material. Would you do it? You know, just kind of play along just for fun. He was like, sure, guys, why not? You know, we didn't think anything had ever come of it. And so we put on I Am Watching You, and we didn't tell him we were recording it. And so we recorded his drumming on it. I mean, it was kick-ass. I mean, he just blew the thing up. We're like, oh, my God, listen to that. That's the kind of drummer we need. And it was, and even his wife was standing there, and she had tears going down her face. She goes, man, he's never played like that before. So I think something between my rhythm playing and his drumming has been there ever since the beginning. It's kind of like a John Bonham, Jimmy Page thing or something. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit too inflammatory of language for me to use, but that we've always had a rhythm thing going on between us.
Yeah, well, even listening to that version, I mean, you've done, I don't know how many versions over the years of that song, but that's long been my favorite.
It's a great version, you know, it really is. And eventually when we started, you know, Matt Hunt started releasing our Titanic albums, we, you know, he kept always asking for bonus tracks, and it seemed like I always had one more of these things to pull out. And Robert had probably, over time, you know, even when Titanic kind of disbanded, he said, well, let's take a couple of your songs and rework them. And I think we did Nightmare and Freak Show, and he changed the title, and him and Keith reworked out the lyrics to I Don't Care. I guess they're just trying something different. You know, in between all of those, we had like 8 or 10 of these other tracks from Maiden Voyage floating around until 2 years ago when Matt Hunt said, why don't you have him retrack from the ground up Maiden Voyage with fresh sessions? So there's yet another version of every one of those songs that's going to come out here in a couple of months.
Oh, my God. You got to stop doing this. It's costing me money, damn it.
And, you know, and the problem with Robert is he always has to upstage not everybody else who's drumming for that band, but himself. So if you thought he was really overplaying on the Freak Show versions that you've heard before, I mean, on this one, he goes completely ballistic and right off of the charts. And he also did we have real drums for the first time to Screaming in Silence. He did the whole album.
That would be really cool to hear.
Yeah, and we spiffed that album up a lot. You know, that music was being written in the late 90s, and alternative was, I don't want to say it was an alternative album, but regular traditional guitar attack music was really uncool at the time, and my solos were short, and I wasn't doing a lot of flashy stuff. And when Screaming in Silence came out, and I think around 2002 or something, Matt was having a guy at angelicwarlord.com. He reviews like all of Retroactive stuff.
Yeah.
And he liked all of my stuff, but he gave me a hard time on that record because I didn't do a lot of solos. And he says, you know, this guy can play better than this. This lead playing is not acceptable. And that is the hardest I've ever been ripped by anybody my lead playing. And you know what? I sat back and, you know, you probably shouldn't listen to critics most of the time, but I sat back and I thought, you know, this guy's right. I really should be playing better leads. And his comments have influenced me on all of the Seventh Power albums. I always keep what he said in mind. You know, just stick to your guns and do what you do. AC/DC did it. It worked for them.
Yeah.
You got to be honest and you got to be who you are. And it doesn't matter what the trends are. And I got to say, when this Screaming in Silence comes out, I fixed the guitar problem on it. There's plenty of solos on it now. And I had to extend some of those sections, which is easy to do when you're working in the computer. You just throw in another chunk.
Yeah. Did you, so for these two records, what have you replaced? Like for is Maiden Voyage, did you get Keith back in and completely recut the whole record?
No, we used all the existing vocals.
So you scrapped all the rest of the music though?
No, that on Maiden Voyage, it's pretty much all what it was. I don't think we hardly changed anything. It's just a full consistent drum sound. You know, it's not two from this session and one from that session. It's all the drums done at once, and they sound better. And he really went crazy. And there was a couple of songs that he never played drums to before, like Fight Back and a couple of the others. And so now it's got the whole, and The Dead Shall Rise. And so A Maiden Voyage has, one consistent drum sound through the whole thing, done all at once. And he plays it out pretty good. And he noticed, he remembers the versions that he did before, so he made sure that these drum versions are different than the other ones. Mm-hmm. The beats are different, the fills are different, the transitions are different. So
well, I think a lot of the drumming was rather simplistic on Maiden Voyage, the original.
Yeah, it was. And we kind of did that intentional. Our drummer, Tim Palmatier, used to change his setup every week. There was a period we went through where he was using less and less drums. And one time I dared him, why don't you go down to a kick, snare, hi-hat, and one crash ride cymbal, no toms and nothing else. And he just kind of laughed and he says, you think so? And I said, I think it'll be killer. And, there was something about him focusing on just kick and snare. We sounded phenomenal when he went into the concert with that lineup.
Oh, wow.
Drums. 4 total pieces. I'm not talking about 4 drum pieces. Usually a 4-piece kit means 1 rack, floor, kick, and snare. No, I'm talking 4 total pieces. And I remember people from other bands, when they saw us set up, I had friends and people that were in clubs that we'd be playing in saying, oh man, we can't leave. I have to watch this band. How's this guy going to pull this off with a metal band with almost no drums? And we were great. Those were the times that we sounded the best, when he only had a kick and a snare and a hi-hat and a one cymbal. Mm-hmm. And the album is very simplistic because of that reason. That's why there's nothing on it, because there is no toms.
Oh, there's no...
There's no toms on that album at all.
You must have probably been having a heart attack then, listening to our cover of Gods of War, and there's toms and other stuff going all over the place.
No, not really. And you guys did a pretty good cover of it too, really.
Oh, thank you.
You guys, your singer, who's your singer?
Me.
Oh, okay. That's right. I forgot what you were playing. Keith Miles is a hard voice to follow, because he's a powerhouse monster voice.
I got the story for you. When we were in the studio cutting that, I was so frustrated, and part of it was because we brought it because we play in a half step, and you guys did that in standard. And when I went to do that, I could sing along to him in standard, but doing it a whole half step down, it's just for some reason my voice couldn't get that same intensity that Keith sings with. I was freaking out. I'm going, how am I ever going to sing this? Because I don't have that snarl in my voice that Keith does.
Right.
And we're sitting there with Glenn, the producer, and he says, you know what? He says, drink a cup of coffee, get really, really, really pissed off, and just go in and cut it. And so I went in and just gave it, I forgot all. I said, I'm not going to do any high screams. This isn't going to be melodic at all. I'm not going to be able to sing for 2 weeks. And I just went in and just gave a really, really intense performance. And for what it turned out, I don't think it was half bad, considering, not many people can do Simon.
No, he's got a tough monster power voice. Robert was always impressed with his delivery. Even though he was always a basic singer and he wasn't always extremely melodic, he always had this killer tone quality. It didn't matter whether he had a cold, what kind of microphone you had in front of him. He grabs the mic and that voice always comes out. He's just one of those guys that always had it. And it just, I wish I had that voice. I could, the things I could do if I had that voice. But
oh yeah,
you guys did a pretty good job. Actually, and your sound quality was pretty good on the recording when I heard it. You sent me that CD, and I was like, huh. Well, I'll be darned. It's different, but it's not bad. This is a pretty decent job. And I was just wondering, man, how are these vocals going to come out? And you covered it pretty decently. Considering you're following a guy with a power voice there. So, I've wanted to know this for a long time now. In 2000, and I guess it'd be 2 or so, you guys changed the name of Titanic and went under Subdux. What happened with that? It's supposed to be pronounced Subdue. That was just another incarnation of music that Keith wanted to do. I was just like, whatever, okay, I guess and we played that concert. We played one show out in Anaheim. California, and we had Robert Sweet with us, and we had Rod Reisner on bass. Matter of fact, some of the pictures on my MySpaces are of that concert, with the one with the blue smoke usually shows me. And it was one of those things. We threw about 7 songs together and went out there and played, and we had a lot of fun. When I told Matt Hunt about that, and I always run everything by me, hey, when you got a deal going with a record company, why not use that as your avenue? And he was like, Bill, I'm not going to put out a band called Subdue because I've paid so much money to popularize all your other groups. You can't change it again. I said, you know what? I'm with you. And we didn't really care one way or the other. At the time, we didn't know, what we were really going to do. We didn't know what the future held. And that was 2002. That was 7 years ago. And look at all the albums that have come out since then.
Now, do you think there's going to be another Titanic record, or this is it?
The greatest hits was the record label's idea. And I thought it was kind of strange to have a greatest hits from a band that wasn't that famous and only has 3 records. But, it's an open door. It's an open subject. It could happen. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't think Matt's ready for it right now because he's got these re-records coming out. So I don't think you'll see another Titanic at least for another 2 years because, next year's 2010, so there's no way you could see anything before 2011. But, of course, the world comes to end in 2012, so we'd have to get it out by January or so to sell a couple of copies. I'm just saying that and kidding. I always like to make that joke. We're going to have to get it out before 2012.
Put it out on the actually, I was going to say you could put it on the 20th, but it wouldn't make it in time to ship it out to people's houses.
In the last 3 weeks, Matt Hunt and myself have been working with an artist from Venezuela. We are finalizing the album covers for these re-releases that are going to be coming out just after the first of the year. There's going to be Final Acts, Beyond Hell's Gate with Robert Sweet on drums. And that re-release is also got a special bonus track of a song called Area 51. It's a Robert Sweet drum solo with a bunch of electronic sound effects going on. It's pretty crazy.
Oh, cool.
And also the original intro and outro for the album. The intro was called Beyond Hell's Gate, and I think the outro was called Eternity, with the choirs and stuff and the hell sound effects and stuff that was on the original cassette recording that was not on the retroactive version. All of these tracks are included, so it's up to 13 tracks now, and we're throwing in the kitchen sink on the re-release. And Robert's on all of it, and these re-releases are going to have new artwork on them too, all 3 of them. Titanic Maiden Voyage and Titanic Screaming Silence, same thing. New artwork for both of those, and some of the artwork, this guy is phenomenal. I mean, wait till you see the Maiden Voyage cover this guy did, man. It is awesome. And, and I have a whole Titanic album, Final Acts record recorded right now. It's kind of hardcore music, borderline speed metal thrash kind of stuff. And Robert's already done the drums on it. We're trying to find the right singer for it, and we don't have the right singer, and but we might. So I've been kind of open to auditions, but it almost has to be somebody in this town because I need to be able to produce this in person. It needs to really be done right, and it's a killer music. And Matt's heard some of it, and he really likes it. He thinks it's really heavy, and it's very good, and it's got some spectacular drumming by Robert Sweet on it here. And I don't know when it's going to come out, man. And it's
wait, are you talking this new speed metal thing, are you going to release that under Final Acts?
I think so. I think that's the only thing it fits under.
Well, obviously Simon wouldn't be available then, eh? Or Keith?
I don't think so. But I don't know what we're going to do with this, though. We're not in any hurry because it's a Final Acts album coming out here in a couple of months.
Yeah. You don't want to oversaturate the market.
So it's probably a 2011 thing, also. And I don't think probably anything else from me, but these 3 re-records will come out on Retroactive next year. Next year will probably be a real busy year for me as far as making music, but the music that I'll make next year probably won't come out till 2011. I want to give somebody a plug right now.
Sure.
This, and you gotta, nobody knows yet, but man, this is going to come out and it's going to blow people away. My cousin Bruce Menchen used to have a group called DTS. The late 80s, early 90s, and he was a Michael Sweet copyist, and he had it down, and he even had the songwriting down, and he paid Robert Sweet to do the drums on all his old DTS music, and he resurrected and re-recorded it all, And I've just heard some of the test tracks of it lately. We don't have it mixed yet. Man, it is phenomenal. And
Wow.
And Robert was, there's a lot of people out there that supposedly sound like Michael, but when Robert was tracking some of these drums about 4 or 5 months ago, every once in a while on certain songs, he'd hear certain melodies and harmonies, and he'd say, "Wow, that really sounds like my brother right there." And he was really impressed with how good the music is as well, and it's got a phenomenal drum sound on it. And wow, I mean, Robert, that's another thing. And he just what he did to all of my music, he took this music up to the next level. And it's just like I'm sitting here going, I'm probably going to listen to this stuff when we get it mixed more than I would listen to Stryper. It's real good.
Oh wow. Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to do this.
Well, hey, you're welcome. It's my privilege. I like it when people are interested in what I do.